My father-in-law CO called me deadweight in front of the boardroom. He thought he could replace the person who generated $31M in revenue with his own unqualified nephew. I just smiled and triggered a hidden contract clause. What happened to the office building 73 minutes later made his entire face go ghostly white. My name is not important. What is important is what I built. I joined Hargrove's company 6 years ago as a senior engineer. Not through a recruiter, not through a favor. I applied, I interviewed, I got the job on my own. Within 18 months I was CTO. When I took over the technical side, the company's platform uptime was sitting at 78%. That means nearly a quarter of every business day. Something was broken. Clients were leaving. The engineering team was patching fires with duct tape and apologies. I rebuilt the infrastructure from the ground up. Within 2 years, uptime was at 99.6%. Annual recurring revenue climbed from $8 million to $31 million over the next 4 years. Those numbers are not my opinion. They are in every quarterly report Hargrove signed his name to. I married his daughter, Sloan, 3 years into the job. I want to be clear about the order of events. I was already CTO before I was his son-in-law. The job came first. The family came second. I thought that mattered to him. I thought the record spoke for itself. One evening, early in our marriage, I asked Sloan what her father said about me when I wasn't around. She smiled. But she paused first, just for a second, half a breath too long. I noticed it and decided it didn't mean anything. I should have paid more attention to that pause. Here is what you need to understand about Hargrove Sr. He built this company 20 years ago, and he never fully forgave it for needing someone else to keep it standing. He was the kind of man who gave speeches at galas about legacy and sacrifice, who shook hands slowly and made eye contact like he was doing you a favor. He believed, genuinely believed, that the company ran because of him, his vision, his name, his decisions. The people who actually made it run were infrastructure, replaceable, background noise. At the company's 5-year anniversary gala, Hargrove gave a 15-minute speech. He named 14 people who had built this place. I had architected the platform every single one of those 14 people worked on. My name was not in that speech. Afterward, one of my senior engineers, Donovan, the kind of guy who notices everything and says exactly as much as needs to be said, leaned over and said, quietly, "He can't fire you. He just doesn't know that yet." I laughed. I thought it was a joke. Donovan was right about one thing. Hargrove didn't know it yet. The first real warning sign didn't come with a confrontation. It came with an email. I was at my desk on a Wednesday morning when it landed in my inbox, same as everyone else's. Subject line: exciting leadership expansion. I remember reading that subject line twice before I opened it, the way you read a text from a number you don't recognize, already knowing, somehow, that you're not going to like what's inside. Hargrove had hired his nephew, Brennan, as co-CTO, effective immediately. Equal authority over all technical decisions. No interview process, no board discussion, no conversation with me. I found out the same moment the receptionist did, the same moment the summer intern did. Hargrove had not called me the night before. He had not stopped by my office that morning. He had sent a company-wide email at 8:47 a.m. and gone straight into a breakfast meeting. I called Sloan. I kept my voice even. I asked her if she knew. She said her father just thought it was time for some fresh perspectives. I asked her when that decision had been made. She said she wasn't sure. I thanked her and hung up. Fresh perspectives. That was the phrase. 6 years of rebuilt infrastructure, $31 million in recurring revenue, 99.6% uptime, and what the company apparently needed was fresh perspectives from a man whose resume was an MBA and 2 years at a startup that had never shipped a product. I'd find out later that Hargrove had described me to the board, more than once, as deadweight we've been carrying too long. He'd been building toward this for a while. I just hadn't known the timeline. Brennan showed up to his first engineering stand-up that Friday. He sat at the head of the table, nodded along for about 4 minutes, then asked whether the team had considered just rewriting everything in something more modern. He said it the way people say things when they have no idea what they're asking. Casual, confident, completely untethered from reality. I looked up from my laptop. Every senior engineer in that room looked up at the same time. Nobody said anything. But there was a look, a specific, shared, exhausted look that passed between 12 people who had spent years building something real, and that look said everything none of us were allowed to say out loud yet. That look made me nervous. Not because of Brennan, because of what it meant that Hargrove had sent him in here at all. The sidelining didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about this kind of campaign, it never does. It happens in increments small enough that each individual moment feels almost deniable. A decision made without you. A meeting you weren't invited to. A reply, all that somehow skipped your name. Taken one at a time, each one looks like an oversight. Taken together, they spell something else entirely. Brennan started overruling technical decisions in public channels. Not in private conversations, not in one-on-ones in Slack threads with 40 people watching, in all-hands meetings, on vendor calls. He would contradict something my team had decided, often without understanding what he was contradicting, and then wait. Just wait. Because he knew what came next. What came next was always Hargrove. I corrected Brennan twice. Both times I did it the right way in writing, with documentation, with specific numbers attached. The first time, I laid out a full technical comparison explaining why his proposed approach would introduce 3 separate points of failure into a system that was currently running at 99.6% uptime. I kept it professional. I kept it factual. I kept it short. Hargrove's response came 30 minutes later, addressed to the entire leadership group. It said, "This matter is settled. Let's keep moving forward as a team." The second time was worse. Brennan had approved a contract with a third-party vendor $240,000 annually for a system my team had already built internally and was running at $18,000 a year. I flagged it in writing. I attached the internal cost breakdown. I noted that the proposed vendor's SLA was actually lower than what we were already delivering ourselves. Hargrove replied to the full thread within the hour. "We need to think bigger. Let it go. Let it go." $240,000 versus $18,000, and the instruction was to let it go. I let it go. But I kept the email chain. The day after the vendor email, Donovan stopped by my office and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit down. He said, "He's not doing this because of Brennan. He's building a paper trail against you." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Every override, every public correction, it's not about the decisions. It's about having something on record before he makes his move." I told him he was overthinking it. He looked at me the way people look at you when they're choosing not to argue. That night, I went home and opened my employment contract for the first time in 4 years. All 63 pages of it. I made myself a cup of coffee and I read the whole thing, slowly, the way you read something when you're no longer reading it as a formality. I found what I was looking for in Section 11B. The clause was titled Termination Conditions and Dignity Protections. It stated, plainly, that any involuntary termination conducted in a manner deemed publicly humiliating, performed without prior written notice, or carried out in the presence of non-HR personnel without documented cause, would trigger automatic severance at 18 months base salary, plus accelerated vesting of all outstanding stock options, plus 12 months of benefits continuation. My base salary at the time of signing had been $310,000. 18 months. I did the math twice. Then I did it a third time, slower, because the number kept coming out the same way. Total exposure somewhere between $850,000 and $900,000. Hargrove had signed this contract. His own legal team had drafted it. And in 6 years, I had never once given him a reason to look at it again. I took a photo of that page. I saved it in a folder on my personal phone. I labeled the folder insurance. Then I closed the contract, finished my coffee, and went to sleep. For the first time in months, I actually slept. I found out about the one-on-ones from 2 different people on the same day, which told me everything I needed to know about how many people had taken the offer. Hargrove had been scheduling private meetings with members of my team, not through HR, not through me. He pulled them in one at a time, 6 senior engineers and 2 engineering leads over the course of a single week, and he made each of them the same proposal. An accelerated promotion. An equity bump somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000 in additional annual compensation. All they had to do was bring him documented performance concerns about the CTO, specific incidents, dates, anything he could put on paper. 2 of them came to me the same afternoon. I thanked them. I kept my face neutral. I asked them not to discuss it with anyone else yet. The remaining 6 said nothing. I didn't know which 6. I still don't, entirely. But I know this 18 months earlier, I had gone to the board personally and argued against a budget cut that would have eliminated 2 of those engineers' positions. I had put my own standing on the line for them. Hargrove knew that. He was counting on the fact that money has a way of making people forget what someone did for them. Maybe it did, for some of them, but not enough of them. Donovan came to me at the end of that week. He sat down across from me, folded his hands on the desk, and said, "You have more people than you think, but you need to move soon." I asked him what soon meant. He said, "Before next Tuesday." That was Thursday. I spent the weekend doing something that probably looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. No confrontations, no phone calls to lawyers, no dramatic gestures. I sat at my home desk for most of Saturday and Sunday, and I documented everything, every system, every architecture decision, every vendor contact and escalation path and deployment protocol the company depended on. I had been carrying most of this in my head for years, the kind of institutional knowledge that accumulates so quietly that nobody notices it's there until it isn't. I put all of it into a document, 74 pages. Complete. Thorough. The most useful thing I had ever written for that company. When I finished, I didn't email it. I printed it, put it in a manila folder, and placed it in the top drawer of my office desk. On Sunday morning, I met Donovan and 4 of the engineering leads at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. We left our phones in our cars. We ordered coffee and we talked for 40 minutes. I asked one question. "If I leave, what do you do?" All 5 of them gave me the same answer. That answer had a word in it. The word was solidarity. Nobody used it dramatically. It was just the word that fit. Monday night, I ironed my best suit and hung it on the door. I wanted to walk into that room Tuesday morning looking exactly like someone who had already won. I walked out of that building at 9:22 a.m. with a cardboard box, my laptop bag, and my phone. The security guard held the lobby door open for me. He didn't know what had just happened upstairs. Nobody in that lobby did. I set the box down on a bench outside, sat next to it, and made one phone call. Her name was Joanna Voss. She was an employment attorney I had retained quietly, 3 weeks earlier, on the advice of no one, just a decision I had made one night after reading Section 11B for the 4th time. I had never needed an employment lawyer before in my life. I gave her a single sentence. "It happened exactly the way I told you it might." She said, "Give me 40 minutes. It took her 32. At 10:09 a.m., Joanna sent a formal legal notice to the company's general counsel, citing Section 11B of my employment contract by name. The clause was clear. The triggering conditions were clear. Involuntary termination, no prior written notice, no HR representative present, conducted publicly, in front of 12 non-HR executives, mid-meeting, without documented cause. Every single condition had been met, every single one, by Hargrove himself, in front of 12 witnesses. The severance calculation was automatic once the clause was triggered. Base salary of $310,000. 18 months. Accelerated vesting on outstanding stock options. 12 months of benefits continuation. The total figure in Joanna's letter was $894,000. She had rounded nothing. She wanted the number to be exact. The company's legal team called Hargrove's assistant twice before they reached him. He was still upstairs. Still in the quarterly meeting. Still, as far as he knew, having a perfectly good Tuesday morning. While he was shaking hands and congratulating himself on finally cutting the dead weight, my attorney was already writing his company a very expensive letter. The insurance folder had just paid out. I didn't know what was happening back in that building until Donovan called me at 10:23 a.m. I was still sitting on that bench outside with my cardboard box. He didn't say hello. He said, "We're sending them now." At 10:17 a.m., 73 minutes after Hargrove told me to clean up my desk, Donovan had submitted his resignation. So had 11 others. 12 letters, submitted within the same 6-minute window, each one identical except for the name and the date. They had drafted them together on Sunday morning at that coffee shop, while I was asking my single question, and all 5 of them were giving me the same answer. I want to be specific about what those 12 people represented, because this is the part Hargrove never understood until it was already over. Those 12 engineers held 100% of the company's infrastructure team, 80% of its active product development capacity, and sole administrative access to 4 mission-critical systems, the kind of access that takes months to transfer, years to fully understand, and cannot simply be reassigned to someone whose last job title was co-CTO and whose most recent technical achievement was asking whether everything could be rewritten. By 11 o'clock that morning, 3 enterprise clients had received automated system alerts, not warnings alerts. The kind that trigger escalation calls and SLA review clauses. By the time Hargrove walked out of that quarterly meeting, straightened his jacket, and reached for his phone, his company's infrastructure was already going dark. 12 people had decided, quietly, over bad coffee on a Sunday morning, that solidarity wasn't just a word. And 12 people had been. He had spent 6 years calling me dead weight. He found out that morning what the building looks like when you remove a load-bearing wall. That afternoon, the company's legal team called my personal cell twice. The second time, I picked up. A man named Fletcher introduced himself as outside counsel and told me, with carefully managed calm, that the company was open to a conversation about my transition. He asked if I would be willing to come back and even temporarily to help stabilize operations. I told him I wouldn't be returning. He asked if there was anything I could provide remotely. Documentation, access notes, system guides. Anything that might help the incoming team get oriented. I told him to check the top drawer of my office desk. He paused. I gave him the room number. I told him the document was 74 pages, fully indexed, covering every system architecture, every vendor relationship, every on-call escalation path, every deployment protocol the company depended on. I told him I had written it over the weekend because I believed in leaving things better than I found them, and because I had known, for longer than I was willing to admit, that this moment was coming. Then I told him I was sending a formal copy by email as well, with a note attached. The note said, "This is everything you need. I genuinely hope it helps." I meant it. That was the part nobody would believe later, but I meant every word of it. I was not trying to sabotage anything. I was not withholding anything. I had built something real, and I had documented it completely. And I was handing it over without conditions, because that was the right thing to do, and because a 74-page document that Hargrove's own team would now have to read, line by line, was the clearest possible record of everything I had been doing while he was busy calling me deadweight. I sent the email. I closed my laptop. That was the last thing I ever did for Hargrove's company. Sloan called me at 2:47 that afternoon. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of a grocery store, not buying groceries. Just sitting. The call lasted 4 minutes. I know because I looked at the screen when she hung up. She asked me if I had known this was going to happen. I told her yes. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How long?" I told her since the Sunday before. She didn't ask about the document, or the lawyers, or the 12 engineers. She asked me one question, and it was the only question that actually mattered between us. She said, "Was there any way to fix it? Between you and him?" I thought about it honestly. I thought about 6 years of quarterly reports with his signature on them. I thought about a gala speech with 14 names and not mine. I thought about an email that landed in my inbox the same time as the summer interns. I told her some load-bearing walls, once someone decides to knock them down, can't just be put back up. You can patch the hole. But the wall is gone. She said, "I need you to know I'm not him." I told her I knew that. I still know that. Whatever happened between us after that day is a different story, and it's not one I'm going to tell here. What I will say is that she was right. She was never him. I was not in the room when it happened. I want to be clear about that. Everything I know about that emergency board meeting came from 3 separate people who were there, all of whom told me the same version of events without knowing the others had spoken to me. When 3 people who don't coordinate give you the same story, you stop calling it a version and start calling it what it is. Hargrove called the meeting for Friday morning, 3 days after Tuesday. The same 14-floor conference room. The same long glass table. The same 12 executives who had watched him fire me mid-sentence while my Q1 slides were still on the screen behind me. Same room, same people, but a very different agenda. By Friday morning, the numbers were not abstract. 3 enterprise clients had logged formal SLA violations. 1 had already sent a contract cancellation notice, citing material failure to maintain agreed service levels. The company's internal equity model, the one the board used to benchmark value between funding rounds, had dropped an estimated 22% in 72 hours. Not projected, not forecasted. In 72 hours. Brennan was in the room. He sat in the chair I used to sit in. When board members asked him direct technical questions, what was the timeline to restore full system access, which vendor relationships were at risk, what the recovery sequence looked like, he gave answers that were, by every account, genuinely painful to listen to. Not dishonest. Just empty. The answers of a man who had been handed a title and handed a chair and had never once been handed the actual knowledge required to fill either one. The man who called me deadweight was now sitting in a room full of people asking where all the weight went. A board member named Calloway spoke first. He had been on the board for 11 years. He was not, by reputation, a man who asked questions he didn't already know the answers to. He looked down the table at Hargrove and asked, in a voice that people in that room would describe to me later as very quiet, who had authorized the termination without an HR representative present. Hargrove said he had. That it was within his authority as CEO. Calloway reached into the folder in front of him and placed a single printed page on the table. He slid it toward the center. Anyone who wanted to read it could read it. It was Section 11B of my employment contract. Calloway asked who had reviewed the contract before the termination decision was made. The room was quiet for a long time. Then Calloway said, "You fired the only person in this building who knew how it worked." Hargrove said something in response. Nobody I spoke to could agree on exactly what it was. What they all agreed on was that it didn't matter, because by that point the room had already shifted that invisible, irreversible shift that happens when 12 people sitting around a table all arrive at the same conclusion simultaneously, and nobody needs to say it out loud. I heard about all of this secondhand, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, while Hargrove sat in that room and understood, for the first time, what the word solidarity actually meant. Joanna called me the following Friday, 8 days after the board meeting, 16 days after Tuesday. I was at the same coffee shop where we'd met on Sunday. Donovan across from me, 2 cups on the table, nothing important being discussed. My phone was face up. When it buzzed and I saw Joanna's name, I held up one finger, and Donovan nodded and looked out the window. She said, "It cleared." The company had chosen not to contest the severance. No mediation, no counterfiling, no attempt to argue the clause or dispute the triggering conditions. Hargrove's legal team had looked at what they had: 12 witnesses, a signed contract with language that could not be read any other way, a documented public termination with zero HR involvement, and they had made the only rational decision available to them. They paid $900,000. The number Joanna had put in that first letter, rounded to nothing, exact to the cent. It cleared on a Friday morning into an account Hargrove had never known about and would never see the balance of. I set the phone down on the table. Donovan looked back from the window. I didn't say anything for a moment. The coffee was good. The morning was quiet. Outside, people were walking to work the way people walk to work when nothing significant has happened to them yet that day. I told Donovan the number. He picked up his cup, looked at it, set it back down. Then he said the only thing there was to say, "Get you another one?" $900,000. Not a penny from me. Every cent from him. 6 weeks after that Tuesday morning, Hargrove Sr. was removed from the CEO position by the board. The announcement used the phrase transition to an advisory role. Nobody in the industry was confused about what that meant. Brennan was reassigned to a non-technical position. The company brought in an interim CTO from outside a 6-month engagement at $380,000. 3 of the enterprise clients who had triggered SLA violations did not come back. The company's valuation, according to people who track these things, dropped approximately 30% over the following quarter. Not because of anything I did, because of what Hargrove had done, and because of what he had never bothered to understand about what he was doing it to. I think about that sometimes. Not with satisfaction, exactly. More like the feeling you get when a math problem you worked out 3 weeks ago turns out to have been correct all along. Donovan called me 5 weeks after the severance cleared. He and 4 of the engineers who had walked out were starting something new, an infrastructure consultancy, independent, built on the kind of technical depth that doesn't get hired away by equity bumps and loyalty tests. He asked if I wanted to come in as an equity partner. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We needed a name. I thought about it for approximately 30 seconds. I thought about a boardroom on the 14th floor, and a man who had spent 6 years telling anyone who would listen that I was dead weight, and a 74-page document sitting in a desk drawer, waiting to prove otherwise. I thought about what holds a building up when nobody is paying attention to it. I called the company Loadwall. We signed our first client contract the same week the news broke about Hargrove's departure. We were profitable by month 3. Not comfortable profitable, actually profitable. The kind of profitable that makes you realize you were always capable of this. You were just spending all of it somewhere else. Some men knock down walls because they can. Some walls knock back.